a graphic, a PowerPoint that talks about all sorts of things about the way that land rent works. And it's very important because we don't see this happening just down the street. Okay, it's something which happens over time, sort of gently, especially for what I'd call new countries. And the United States, my goodness, United States and Australia are really good case studies, where in, let's say Australia, when the first fleet arrived here in, when was it, 1788, there was a lot of good land, a lot of rubbish land around, sort of in Australia as well, but a lot of good land. And it didn't cost anything. There were, certain restrictions that the government tried to put on it, access to it. But basically, you could get land for nothing. And what that meant was, I'm just going to take this back, but I'm not going to go right through the discussion here. But the thing about it is that when a country is first discovered, opened up, and oddly this works in Europe as well, only you have to wind the time frame back by, well, about 1,000 years, or actually a bit more like, 1,000, 1,500, something like that. But you have a situation where good land is available for free, which means that somebody using it is able to get all of the income without having to pay anything for it. If we look at the European example, if we're sort of talking about, in that period, say from the end of the Dark Ages to the end of the medieval period, Europe was full of forests with little patches of cleared land with villages and towns and monasteries and whatnot scattered about through there. And, as much as it gets cold there in winter, the land was quite productive. And if you wanted more land, you just went out and chopped a few more trees down. So I guess it had that kind of a cost, but it was purely a labor cost, quite accessible. And, that's how the land in Europe, the usable land, actually expanded. It didn't expand with cost. Feudal system is a bit more complicated, but I don't want to deal with that now. The thing about it is that as you run out of the first quality land, then rent begins to develop as the differential between the free land, the land that if you're in a European, you just have to go out and chop down a few more trees, versus the old property, which may have been more attractive because it was close to the river or close to the town or whatever. And the gap between those two levels gives you rent. Now, this is what the lecture was that you've gone through. I don't want to belabor that because the recorded lecture goes into it in all the detail. The important thing is that by the time all of this settles down and you actually run out of useful land, the return for labour and enterprise, the actual wages and business profits, it's actually sort of come down because land costs a lot of money. And you folks, you've just done the assignment, and especially for those of you who chose commercial industrial properties, that the cost of land is a big part of your profit loss calculations, and it really does squeeze how much you've got left over for your entrepreneurial profits and also how much you can pay your employees. So that's kind of the situation. And I do recommend that you look at the video. Okay, I want to take this forward because there's a whole lot of stuff that I just didn't have the space, if you like, to go into, and I thought this would be the ideal opportunity to sort of take it further. This process here you will not find in a regular economics textbook, and you will find it not well recounted in a lot of property economics textbooks, so the more specialised economics textbooks for property investment and so on. And there is a reason for that, but I won't go into it now. We might talk about it in discussion maybe even next week. But this is the way that land works. The theory of this was articulated by David Ricardo around 1815, so about 200 years ago. And everything I'm showing you here is basically just application of David Ricardo. So it's not a surprise. It is often described as being peculiar to what's called Cambridge School economics, because David Ricardo had a lot to do with that institution, and they've tended to sort of follow on with this kind of a focus. So this is Ricardo's law of rent, which has just been described. I want to look a bit further with it. The thing about David Ricardo's law of rent is that it is actually always an operation, but typically people don't notice it. Now, why is that important for property investment? Because if there's a process that's actually working behind the scenes, if you like, and especially if most other people don't understand it very well, if you're going to be involved in property investment, it gives you a really powerful head start if you do understand it. And that's why it's a key part of what we're going to be covering, now, certainly in this week 11. So it's not as though you just put your feet up, okay, a couple of weeks to get through the exam. I don't have to worry about these topics too much. It's not quite like that. Okay, so what else is happening here? We'll talk about that. I want to get on to some other topics now. I take it for granted that you've watched the recorded video. Maybe next year I might put some of this more as more recorded videos. I want to look at some of the implications